March 7th, 1940. Karelia Front, Finland. The forest is silent, the kind of silence that hums inside your ears. Snow hangs heavy on the pines, the world painted in white and deathly stillness. A frozen pond glimmers under a pale sun, its surface flawless except for the faint trace of a single breath, curling like smoke from a figure half buried in the snow. That figure is Simo Häyhä, the White Death. He lies so still that even the frost forming on his eyelashes looks undisturbed. His Mosin-Nagant rifle rests in the snow beside him, iron cold, bolt greased against freezing. No scope, never a scope. He believes glass is a death sentence. The sun, even in the dim northern sky, can betray you with a single flash. And across that frozen pond, beyond the tangle of birch trunks and shattered artillery craters, another rifleman waits, a Soviet sniper, expert, patient, invisible. For hours they have hunted each other without moving, a deadly mirror match, each breath measured in heartbeats. Simo lowers his cheek to the stock and gazes not toward the forest, but into the ice. Beneath the pond's glassy crust, the world is inverted. Birch trees lean upside down, and there, just faintly, a pinpoint glint dances in the reflection. A lens. Simo exhales, slow as melting snow. He angles his rifle downward, calculating by instinct. The shot will strike the ice, then climb, a ricochet through the mirrored surface. It's madness, it's impossible, but so is he. He squeezes the trigger. The rifle cracks through the still air. The bullet slams into the ice, sparks white mist, then skips upward into the tree line. A half-second later, silence. Then a body drops from the snowbank across the pond. Simo doesn't move, doesn't smile. He simply reloads, the metallic click swallowed by the cold wind, and vanishes once more into the white wilderness. He's done this before. He'll do it again. Because for Simo Häyhä, every frozen pond is a mirror, and every reflection a target. But how did he become this ghost of winter? How did a farmer, with no formal training, turn into the most lethal marksman in recorded history?
Before the war, Simo Häyhä's world was small, a farmhouse, a rifle, and the endless Finnish woods. Born in 1905 in the village of WWII near the Russian border, he was the kind of man who could vanish into the forest before breakfast and return at dusk with 3 rabbits and a quiet grin. He wasn't tall, barely 5'3", but he was built like the land itself, compact, silent, and unyielding. Long before the Soviets crossed the border, Simo had already learned the art of stillness. He hunted in silence, sometimes waiting hours in the snow for a single clean shot. His rifle became an extension of his hands. He could judge wind by the taste of the air, distance by the flicker of a birch leaf. When the Winter War erupted in November 1939, Simo was 34. He didn't hesitate. He joined the Finnish militia, the Sotilaskunta, and was assigned to the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34. No one knew his name yet, but within weeks, whispers began to spread through the trenches of a soldier who never missed. He carried no telescopic scope, only the standard M2830 rifle with open iron sights. His comrades thought it was superstition, but to Simo it was survival. The glass of a scope could fog, reflect sunlight, betray position. A lens was a bright invitation for death. And so, day after day, Simo crawled through the snowdrifts of Kola, a place where temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero, where gun oil froze solid, and men's fingers turned black with frostbite. The Soviets advanced in waves, outnumbering the Finns more than 10-1, but from the tree line, unseen and unmoving, Simo began to speak the language he knew best, one shot at a time. He dressed completely in white, even packing snow into his mouth to hide the steam of his breath. He built small snow mounds in front of his firing position to absorb muzzle flash. He froze his trigger finger on purpose so it wouldn't twitch or flinch. Each day he took a position before dawn. He didn't leave until dusk, and when he did, the forest behind him was littered with the still forms of men who never knew where the bullet came from. By February, his tally had passed 200 confirmed kills. Some said 3. The Soviets began to whisper a name that carried across the frostbitten fields like a curse: Belaya Smert, the White Death. And the Red Army, humiliated and furious, decided they would hunt this phantom down. They sent counter-snipers, dozens of them, some of their best. One by one, they never returned. Until one morning, a glint on a frozen pond would set the stage for one of the strangest, most impossible shots of the entire war.
February 17th, 1940, Kola River Line. Dawn broke pale and colorless, light spilling over the treetops like cold ash. The forest was calm, too calm. Not a bird, not a breeze, just the faint creak of ice expanding beneath the snow. Simo Häyhä lay prone beneath a camouflage net, body pressed into the drift until even the frost had accepted him. He had been there since before sunrise, rifle resting steady across his arms. The air was so cold that the metal stung his cheek like a burn. He'd already taken 2 shots that morning, clean, efficient, untraceable. But something felt wrong now. The silence wasn't peace, it was a trap waiting to spring. Across the white expanse, the Soviet lines had gone still, no motion, no chatter. And then, just at the edge of a frozen pond, a flicker. Too faint for most men to notice, but Simo wasn't most men. A reflection. He blinked once. There it was again, a glint of light, quick and surgical, cutting through the haze. He knew that shimmer. A sniper's scope, catching the sun. The Soviets had sent another one. He didn't move his head, only his eyes. If the enemy sniper was smart, and they usually were, he was already scanning for the smallest disturbance, a puff of breath, a flash of cloth, a shadow in the snow. Simo's heart didn't race. It never did. He measured the glint's position through the mirrored sheen of the pond. The surface acted like a giant frozen lens, a perfect reflector. He could see the ghost of the shooter's perch without exposing himself. He adjusted his aim, not toward the forest, but toward the ice. The angle had to be exact. Too shallow, the bullet would deflect wide. Too deep, and it would shatter the ice before reaching the target. It was madness to try. But madness was something Simo had long since befriended. He waited, breath slow, finger still. The faintest tremor, a bird lifting from a branch, and Simo fired. The shot cracked through the silence, echoing across the snowfields. A plume of frost exploded upward as the bullet struck the pond. For a split second, everything froze again. Then, across the tree line, something moved. A flinch, a tumble, a figure fell forward, face first into the snow. The ice went still once more. The duel was over before it ever began. Simo didn't celebrate, didn't even blink. He reloaded, rolled deeper into the snowbank, and vanished. But word of the shot, the impossible ricochet, spread like fire through the Finnish trenches. Soldiers whispered that Häyhä could shoot around corners, that he could bend bullets through ice, that even the frozen lakes themselves obeyed him. For the Red Army, it wasn't superstition anymore. It was fear, raw and choking. Entire units began to refuse movement at dawn, terrified of the invisible hunter they couldn't find. And still, Simo kept hunting. Each sunrise brought a new tally. Each sunset, another ghost left behind in the snow. Until one day, fate turned its rifle back on him.
March 6th, 1940. Kolla. The war was nearing its brutal end. Finland's lines had held longer than anyone thought possible. For over 3 months, Simo Häyhä had haunted the forests like a living legend. Over 500 confirmed kills. Entire Soviet battalions advancing cautiously, scanning every drift of snow for the glimmer of his rifle. But that morning, the air felt different. Heavier. Even Simo could feel it. The Russians were desperate now, launching relentless artillery barrages that turned trees into splinters and snow into flame. The very forest that had protected him for so long was now crumbling around him. He crawled through the shattered pines, scanning the horizon. The snow was red in places, the scent of smoke mixed with pine resin and gunpowder. He could hear the distant cry of wounded men, Finnish and Russian alike, fading into the wind. Simo took up his position once more, rifle resting across a mound of snow, hardened like stone. He pressed his cheek to the iron sight, eyes narrowing toward the far tree line. And then, a flash. A metallic glint. He barely had time to think. The shot struck him square in the face. The bullet, an explosive round, shattered his jaw, tearing through his left cheek and ripping half his face apart. The force threw him backward into the snow. His rifle slid from his hands, disappearing into the drift. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no breath. Just the slow, crimson spread melting the frost beneath him. His comrades found him minutes later, still alive, eyes open, barely conscious. His face was unrecognizable, torn and mangled, yet his hand still clutched the rifle's strap. Even as they dragged him away on a sled, he tried to pull it close. Doctors at the field hospital assumed he would die within hours. They covered him, thinking he was gone. But Simo didn't die. He lay in a coma for a week, awakening on March 13th, the very day Finland signed the peace treaty ending the Winter War. When he finally opened his eyes, half his face was gone. But the war was over. The legend of the White Death had already become myth. Soviet records would later claim that Simo Häyhä had single-handedly killed over 500 of their men in less than 100 days, an average of more than 5 a day. Unofficial tallies whispered the number was closer to 700. He never bragged, never wrote memoirs, never spoke of the war. When journalists visited him decades later, he would sit quietly on his porch, his rebuilt jaw stiff, his eyes bright as the Karelia snow. Once, a reporter asked him what he thought of his record, of the fear his name still carried. Simo paused, then simply said, "I did what I was told, as well as I could." He lived into his late 90s, dying peacefully in 2002, an old man, wrapped in silence once more. But on that frozen pond, somewhere in Karelia, the reflection of a rifle still lingers in memory. A reminder that one man, armed with nothing more than patience, instinct, and ice, once turned the mirror of nature into a weapon that outlasted an empire.